and we are back for episode 2 of Our Stories, Our Pride. My name is Kelsey, but you can call me Kels. I am your guest host of this amazing limited series podcast brought to you by It Gets Better Canada and made possible with financial support from the Canadian Red Cross as well as the Public Health Agency of Canada. Episode 1, we talked to Heather Rowland and kind of curated a queer mental health and wellness toolkit. I know that I was able to even get some things out of that conversation that I wanted to try and practice in my day-to-day life. So I hope the same for you after listening to episode 1. I am so excited for episode 2 because I was able to have a beautiful conversation with a dear friend and mentor to me in Armando Perla. Armando is the head curator of the Textile Museum of Canada in Ontario, and they have had just an incredible and illustrious career in the museum and heritage sphere globally, not just in Canada. You're going to hear about the work that Armando did while he was the chief curator of the city of Toronto. COVID was in full swing, and he was able to connect with different groups of the queer community in Toronto. And all of these groups were comprised of queer youth who were doing amazing things to still band together, to find community, to find artistic expression in a really crazy time that we all experienced. And you get to hear all about it and about the exhibits that they created together right here in episode 2 of Our Stories, Our Pride.
Thank you, Kelsey. I'm also very happy to be here with you today, and thank you for asking me to share with you some of the work that we've been doing. The pandemic affected many different communities across Toronto, was quite significant, and so a big part of that, of course, had to do with youth. I always said that, I like working with the margins of the margins, so not just youth, but also queer youth, right? One of them was a collective of performers, of performance artists, who are all youth as well. And so they're called Passion Fruit. And then also I started working with the ballroom community, which again is largely queer youth. Museums, as you know, have historically not only excluded our communities, but have also harmed them, right? Like, and they've taken so much from our groups, from our people. They've taken stories, they've taken objects, and all of that. So I remember, I'll give you one very specific example, and it was exactly with that collective with Passion Fruit. And we met them. I met them through friends as well. They introduced me to, like I said, some of the performers from Passion Fruit. And the first meeting that we had, it was not an easy one. So there was some relationship repairing that needed to take place. A few weeks after those initial meetings, and they getting to know each other, I got an email from Ty Sloan, who is a two-spirit performer, or like performance artist as well, from the community and who's youth. They asked if they could put the name of one of our museums in one of the in an application that they were making. They wanted to make a film, and they wanted to use Spadina House as the venue. So again, you're talking about taking heritage spaces with our queer bodies, right? And so that's kind of what they were proposing. They wanted to really look at the history of the club kids in Toronto, but then also related to the lack of or the loss of spaces, of queer spaces during the pandemic, because many of the clubs that serve as community spaces for us were closed during the pandemic. And so they wanted to now that they were starting to come back, because at the time we were coming out of the lockdowns, and so clubs were starting to open again and performances were starting to happen. So they wanted to celebrate that and to make a film about it at Spadina House. They took over the house, which was amazing because Passion Fruit, they're all racialized, they're all queer, they're all non-binary or gender fluid. And so having, those bodies take over that space that has been historically very white. I mean, they took the land, right, from indigenous communities, and they built this structure that, Spadina House is known as the Downton Abbey of Toronto, and it was a very
well saying that because I don't know what it is.
it's a very white mansion, right? Like built on, again, like stolen land, and it's like, yeah, It's very Eurocentric, and the narratives that have been told have been also very Eurocentric from the perspective of the family who used to own the house, and to bring or to allow that collective of brown, queer, non-binary, gender non-conforming people to take over every room of the house to film. It talks about queer sexuality, right? And they're also pushing the boundaries in a way that they're trying to make their performances, their burlesque, performances in the films and all of these projects that they engage with and that they create sex positive. It was fantastic. Like I said, we've got so much feedback from the queer community being like, oh, finally, I feel seen. This is amazing. And yeah. And I don't know if you want me to talk about also the relationship with the ballroom community, because there's also been some really amazing project that has come from there.
I mean, I would even just as myself love to hear about it, but definitely because there's got to be, I'd assume, tons of queer youth in that scene and just probably being proponents of amazing, amazing work.
Yes, a lot of them are youth. Most of them actually are, queer youth, right? They're very young. Some of them are in their teens and, late teens and stuff. So I started working with two people in particular. So Nick and Tamer, they said initially, like right away, they said, well, something that we would really need is spaces where we can do our practices because we're not safe. Right now, they said we are practicing on the streets. We're like sort of taking over like, buildings or classrooms in universities that are not being used, and we just sort of like sneak around and do it. And it's not safe, they said, because a lot of the people from the community are exactly that. Like the youth, they're trans, they're racialized, and so they get harassed. So they told us all the stories, right? And so I said, well, we have 10 museums, we have 10 physical spaces. Why don't you come with us and do a tour? So they settled on Fort York. And so the community has been using since last year, and they're still doing it today, the space, some of the spaces, the Blue Barracks at Fort York, to do their weekly practices. They also do classes in there. They do all kinds of like things that, they've appropriated that space that again, it's Fort York. And to bring again all these queer youth, racialized, trans, non-binary into taking those spaces has been quite a transformation. So we did that. Like I said, the using of the spaces. Then we also were able to do a ball, the first ever ball that the city of Toronto threw together in partnership with Maggie's, which is the sex worker organization, and the ballroom community. And we did that in August of last year, and it was fantastic. We also used another of those heritage spaces from the cities, and it was amazing to see again, like the appropriation of that space. So many people, joy, queer brown joy, queer
Yeah.
brown trans joy.
Can't help but like be kind of blown away to hear about it. Not only is it just as itself groundbreaking work that is happening between racialized queer youth and this relationship that you're building with museums, but who would have thought that all of these other positive things could come out of it? Whether it's the ballroom community having a space to be safe, that's such a powerful thing to have been a part of, and it's just really wonderful to broadcast that.
I know, like it's funny because they always joke around and they call me, like the invisible sort of fairy godmother of like the ballroom community. So
Yeah, work.
to me, the making of an exhibition is just an excuse to bring together all of these different groups and parts of the communities that are working on their own side individually to bring structural change, right? But when you bring them together, then they can meet and they continue to push for that change, but together. Coalition building that takes place from making an exhibition is something that cannot be underestimated.
I think it's like a wildfire, especially when youth get together, when they are like minded and passionate and excited and working towards a similar goal. So, when we're talking about the ballroom community, I just had a curiosity as you were speaking. Did you start connecting with them at the same time, maybe as Passion Fruit? So, kind of closer to the quote unquote end of the height of the COVID-19 pandemic? Did you hear about maybe their experiences during that time of being in isolation and locked down from one another?
Yes, yes. So I started, yeah, almost at the same time. So early 2022, yes. And so it was really interesting because not only with these communities, but a few of the communities that we engage with, right? That we ask what the experience had been during pandemic. I guess we expected to hear a lot of negative stories. I guess came from the performance artists, right? That needed to access the bars to like do their job and all of that. And so they were very isolated and they felt very lonely. But when it came to the ballroom community, something that they told us about was about how they, because of the lockdowns, went online. And that, they were having balls online and like all of these different things and like activities.
What does that even look like? A ball online?
Yes, and so, but that's the thing because they were also connecting with people from all around the world. And so they had not had access to these other performers, or these artists and all these other people. And the pandemic sort of prompted that. And that was something very positive that came out of it. Existing online and being digital was actually something that was positive in relation to, the pandemic.
I so relate to that though, because as you know, it's really similar in mirroring what happened for me with everything involving queer in Alberta and all the TikToking and etc. Like, I don't think if the pandemic hadn't happened, I would have felt such an onus to seek community in the way that I did. And because of that, it just opened a whole new world of possibilities.
Exactly. So I think, the pandemic pushed a lot of our communities to really find each other, but all that ingenuity, right, and all of that creativity that was sparked, that was there, but it really happened because we had no other choice but to find, each other and to keep each other safe and to help each other during the pandemic.
Yeah, and I think it speaks a lot too to the resiliency of our community. I think it's such a unique experience that in that really tumultuous time, our community went and tried to use the resources digitally that were available to us to still be able to thrive and to still be able to stay connected because we understand how important that is.
Yes. Oh, speaking about that too, another group that I forgot to mention was the Crip Collective, which is another collective that was part of the exhibition, but that we also work with. And they are a collective of queer, racialized youth living with disabilities as well.
Oh,
And
yeah.
so, yeah, and so that was another layer, right, of the pandemic, and that was another angle to that story, which again, very positive stories coming from the disabilities community because a lot of the things that they had been asking for a long time in terms of accessibility, finally everyone was asking for because everyone needed them, right? And so things became accessible online. People weren't like required to, be physically present in classes, which was a huge help for many, people who can't really like mobilize themselves or, with chronic, like illnesses, chronic pain, and all of these things, right? So things became much more accessible. And now that we are sort of like leaving the lockdowns behind and all of that, and we're coming back to like the normal that we had before, we're forgetting about these parts of our communities, right? Like they're being left behind again. I didn't really want to just stay with, the traditional parts of the LGBT community that we see feature in exhibitions or that we see, sharing space in museums. I wanted to really go to those who had not been engaged with in the past.
To hear that so much positivity came out of this really stressful time for our community, like that just makes me feel so happy to be receiving that knowledge and then to share it with It Gets Better Canada.
Yeah, exactly, right. And I think it just shows because yeah, things weren't easy, like I mean, even the piece that the Crip Collective did is dedicated to one of the members who passed away during the pandemic. But to have that resiliency and to know that that resiliency and that power comes from community, I think it's really important. And like you said, it does get better for many of us when we find that community.
Did you find that maybe there was a sense of empowerment for these individuals when they moved into the museum space with you?
Oh, yeah, 150%, right? This is something that they keep telling me all the time, and they keep saying, if we would have not started working with the museums, we would have never known that it was so important for
Wow.
us to like keep, preserve our history and to do all these programs and to do all these things that we're doing now, right? Because that came from the work that we started doing together.
What would you maybe say to any other artists who are listening across Canada or just queer youth who are finding themselves and looking for expression in maybe troubling times like COVID? What would you say for them about how art can be a way to navigate that?
I think what happens a lot of the times is that there's so many creative people in our community that are doing amazing stuff and they don't consider themselves artists, right? So I have these conversations over and over again with people that are like, oh, oh, I didn't even realize that that could be considered art. Or people that tell us, like we are trying to be considered artists, but we're not. And so I think that what needs to happen is that we need to use our museums to put resources into helping people to understand, to navigate the systems, right? And to people, I would just say, continue to do what you do and find, people and organizations that can support you.
Youth have so much agency and they have so much power and they truly are the change makers of the world. So to hear that this is what you saw in that really stressful period of time again, that's just absolutely incredible. And even though it is surprising, I shouldn't be surprised.
No, I agree completely. I mean, like I said, it's not what I saw, it's what the community and the youth and the people showed me.
Well, thank you so much, Armando. This conversation, I feel every conversation I have with you is just the best, but this one was extra, extra special.
Well, thank you. I appreciate that. And thanks for, opening the space as well.
Oh my goodness, anytime. This is kind of an opportunity for you if you have any projects that you want to share with the It Gets Better Canada audience or let queer youth across the country know about what you're doing.
Well, right now I've just started in this new position at the Textile Museum, so I'm just sort of planning, what we can do in the next few years. I'm trying to understand the communities that the museum has already been working with. I'm going to continue working with the communities that, we've just talked about, right? Like all these different groups. I'm also going to continue. They're very excited that I am here and they want to work with the museum as well. I've also been asked to be the curator for the Biennale de Langoy, which is, in Montreal as well, for 2025. So I'll be doing that. I'll be spending time in Montreal this summer. So I will be there for all of Pride. And then I'm also going to Ecuador to a
You're like all
museum
over the place.
to a museum gathering, well, a gathering of museum professionals working with communities across Latin America. So a lot of them already know and work with, so it's going to be really exciting to be there. The only thing is like it coincides, it's the same week as Pride here, but
I'm only devastated that I won't see you, but I understand.
I'll try to maybe come back earlier and see.
And that is a wrap on episode 2 of Our Stories, Our Pride. What an amazing conversation with Armando. I know that for me, I always love hearing about the work that they do all over the world, but it is the work involving BIPOC, queer youth here in Canada that really, really resonates with me the most. I hope that you learned a little bit about queer resiliency and the ways that other youth in the country are rising up to be triumphant and to express queer joy. Once again, I have to give a shout out and a massive thank you to the Canadian Red Cross, as well as the Public Health Agency of Canada, because as we know, this limited series would not have happened without their support. So thank you for supporting queer youth and queer stories in Canada today. If you want to keep following along with all things It Gets Better Canada, we have Facebook, Instagram, TikTok, you name it, and you'll probably find it. If you go to itgetsbettercanada.org, you can also follow along there, read more queer stories, and donate. To tie off the series in episode 3, we get to talk to a queer youth who tells me all about graduating during COVID-19 and the experiences that came with that. Stay loud, stay proud, Canada, and I'll see you next time.